Well, it is very interesting that we have a conference that is happening on what Christians would call Good Friday. So I think that's very interesting. This week has been it's also referred to in Christian traditions as Holy Week, and watching the progression of Christ to the cross and his death and burial and resurrection. Um, and so I find it interesting because I was trying to schedule some stuff, and it's really hard to travel on during Holy Week, and specifically around this particular event. So I am delighted to be here and absolutely thrilled that we could spend this time together. And I want to say I appreciate the fact that you could have selected other places to be, but you elected to be at this place at this time. So I want to honor that. In honoring that, I also kind of have a disclaimer that I have to, not have to, but would like to give. So I walk into the room with a certain degree of privilege. And I want to recognize that because there may be things that I miss. There may be things that I may not be as sensitive to because of that, and I want you to hold me accountable to those things. All right. So I am a male. I am African American. I am a cisgendered male, meaning that my biology and and the way that I express myself are congruent. So those two things are congruent. The way I identify myself is congruent. I am somewhat educated. I have advanced degrees. I make a certain amount of, I'm in the middle class, so to speak, if you will. And so, given those things, oh, and I'm also heterosexual. So, although, seriously, I mean, those are things that give me a certain amount of privilege. And so I want to recognize those and name those things because those privileges also give me certain blind spots. And so there are things that I'm trying to constantly be aware of in terms of my language, in terms of how I interact with folks, so that I become a better human being. And then the better trainer comes later, right? So I wanted to offer that and eliminate any skeletons or elephants, however you want to talk about that. That could be an obstacle to our learning. So, but what I will say is that please don't take what I have to say as the Black experience. I was at a training once. They were like, Andre gives the Black perspective, and I wasn't quite sure what the Black perspective was, and then how did I speak for groups of people. I am an individual who has learned some things that I'd like to share from you, and most of those things I learned from students that I taught when I was a high school teacher. So I'd like to share those things with you. Right? So we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to talk about this idea of race and racism because we need a new paradigm for how we have that conversation because the world requires a different conversation. Right? It's very interesting to me that as I was walking here I'm staying at a hotel called the Decca, which is right down the street, and I'm walking up here, and there was a church that had a permanent fixture sign, permanent, like for real, like it's going to be there for a while, that said Black Lives Matter. That was profound to me, that a church would have a fixed, not one of those banners that you can buy for $99 and pick up, and then when the wind blows it falls off. But they had a permanent structure that said Black Lives Matter. It also struck me that another church around the corner from that had what I would call, and I don't know what the term is here in Seattle for this, but I would refer to it as a tent city. that they had shelters set up for the homeless on their parking lot. And for a church to do that, that actually sounds like what churches should be doing, right? And I read some things that were very interesting that I didn't know about Seattle as I was preparing for this workshop. And I know that not everyone comes from Seattle, so I wanted to just point that out. But I thought it was interesting. The councilwoman who actually sued the police and was awarded a settlement in her favor, which typically is kind of unheard of, that citizens are able to actually prevail against the police. I thought that was very interesting. And I also thought it was interesting that the federal government with the Seattle police had to step in and intervene in some pretty significant ways. Which is, and we'll talk about this a little bit in our workshop, which, I have an interesting relationship with the federal government in terms of what I think of them, right? So one of the things that we know about weapons, what do we know about weapons in the United States? We love weapons. We love them. And the bigger the what? The better. The bigger the, wow, Rambo and Terminator, turned into weapons, right? So, and has there been a weapon that the United States as a government has not used? No. No. We're notorious for Hiroshima, right? Hiroshima. We're notorious for that, right? So people say, well, don't mess with the United States because they'll use that weapon. And there may be other weapons that we have that, blah, blah, blah. But there haven't been weapons typically that we haven't used, right? So why are we giving police surplus weapons and not anticipate them using them? Right? I mean, because I don't know if anyone's here from a municipality or city standpoint, but what I understand is once folks get these surplus weapons, I have friends who are chiefs of police and police officers. They practice with those things. They run drills. They do. So what is practice for when you get paid? So you're good at it when what? When you can use it, right? So there, it would be like you guys have a football team here, is that right? Right. So no, it'd be like all those folks practicing but never playing, right? So they're looking for opportunities, and sometimes players make opportunities to play, right? So I think that's interesting that they would smack someone's hand for aggressive policing when they created the atmosphere where people would be aggressive to use the great weapons that they have. Right? So that's kind of where I come from. So let's do this. Can you take out a piece of paper? And what I'd like for you to do on that piece of paper is I want you to draw 5 circles. You draw 5 circles on that piece of paper. Once you've drawn those 5 circles, and they can be conjoining circles, they can be however you want to have the Olympic symbol, however that works, right? I want you to write down one thing that you value or one thing that is important to you in each one of those circles. So what's one thing that's of value to you or important to you in each one of those circles? So it could be a concept like justice or freedom. It could be a place like Ivers, or it could be a loved one, a significant other. It could be a motorcycle or a sailboat. So it could be a thing. So one thing that you value in each one of those circles. Or that is important to you. One thing that you value or is important to you. All right, it looks like most people have 4, if not all 5. What I like to do now is I want to play a game. The game is very simple. What I want you to do is I want you to find as many people as you can who either agree with what you have on your paper or they have a similar thing on their paper. And once you find someone who either has something similar or the same thing, I like for them to put their initials in the thing that is either the same or like what you have. All right? So as many people as you can. You have 90 seconds to do this, starting now. Sixty seconds. Forty-five seconds. Kathleen may want this. Right. 10 seconds. Four, three, two, one, and game over. Game over. Hey, man, what is your name? I'm sorry. Gail. Gail. So I will tell you, Gail just cracked me up. So you guys heard Gail chuckle earlier, right? So Gail and I were just talking, and she was like, "Why are you explaining all that stuff? You're in Seattle." That was like, she's like, "Why are you explaining all this stuff? You're in Seattle, right?" Like, so Seattle people get it, right? So, but no, the reason I did that is because a lot of places where I speak, I have to recognize that stuff, right? And so if typically if we don't name stuff, it goes unexamined or becomes a part of a narrative that other people want to play out. So I like calling attention to those things because it keeps me humble, and that's and when you're as good as I, no, I'm just teasing. But it certainly keeps me humble and keeps me mindful where I am and how I speak and what positions I'm engaged in and what things I'm afforded that I may not if I didn't have those advantages. And I'm certainly held back in some other ways. Fortunately, I'm not aware of many of those. but I'm sure that is also occurring simultaneously. So as you were going around the room, first of all, was everyone able to at least get one signature on everything they had? Okay, at least one. Okay, cool. Is there anyone that was not able to get any signatures at all? Your paper is totally blank. No? Okay, great. As you were going around the room, were there things you saw on other people's papers and you were like, oh, why didn't I think of that? I should have wrote that down. What were some of those things that you saw on other people's paper that you said you should have wrote down? Education, honesty, integrity, community, doing the right thing, joy, nature. What was that? Intelligence. Emotional intelligence, I'm sorry. Emotional intelligence. Great. As you were walking around the room, were there things that were either difficult to sign on, or to find people to sign on, or you actually didn't find anyone to sign? Yes?
Shelter, clean water.
Okay, so we'll start with shelter, right? So please raise your hand if you value shelter, even if it wasn't written on your paper. Clean water, food. All right, great. Yeah, you guys just didn't have a chance to connect, right? Yeah. Other things that you saw, or it was difficult to find someone to sign on, or you, yes? Sleeping in and chocolate at the same time. No. Sleeping in and chocolate. If you value those things, or those things are important to you, please raise your hand. One or the, okay, great. One more. Was there one more? Yes. Daybreak. All right. So if you value daybreak, so seeing the sun rise and break the darkness. Oh, great. So what do you think is what do you think is the goal or the moral of this particular activity? What was that after in this particular activity?
We have more in common than we think.
We have more in common than we think.
Use different words to describe things.
We use different words to describe things. We have way more than 5 values, right? And to connect. Right? I don't know about you, but particularly in the Midwest where I was raised, and I got my training and have had most of my experiences. I've gone to, and the names of these things have changed over time, right? So I remember going to sensitivity training. I remember going to ADL's World of Difference trainings, cultural competence trainings, anti-racism trainings. I've gone to a lot of those. And in retrospect, I find it interesting that more often in those trainings, we spend a great deal of time talking about our differences. And I don't know that we've necessarily in the past spent the same amount of time talking about our similarities. And it is my belief that differences are important, but we also have to remember those things that make us most alike. So how is it, do you think, that, what would you label those things that you wrote down, those 5 things that you wrote down? If you had to give them a label, what label would you give them? Priorities, values, core beliefs, current mood, okay? So current mood, value, priorities. How do you think it was possible for you to connect with other people who have the same values, priorities, or similar values, priorities? How do you think that was possible? Yes?
Because it probably could all come down to needs on various levels.
We all have the same needs on various levels, right? So in lots of ways, we are very much alike because we are human. So I'm gonna write an equation on the board, and I want you to tell me what is the solution to this equation. Now this is the biological equation. Do you have an answer for that? Baby. Okay, cool. I'll put up another equation and you tell me if this. And I'm talking about DNA. I'm talking about DNA, people, right? What comes out of that? The answer is simple. Prince. Right? So in terms of our DNA, right? When humans come together, what do humans produce? More humans, right? They produce more humans. Now, what if I have a human from Portland and a human from Seattle? What will they produce? A human. All right. What about someone from Indonesia and someone from Japan? What about an Egyptian and a Japanese person? Human. What about a white person and a black person? What do they produce? Now, it's very interesting that it seems goofy to even go this route, right? To even talk about these things. But we really get confused when we start talking about what race is and how race and the race consciousness plays out. Because it's easy for us to say this, but it's interesting when I go into a store, I'm always trying to figure out what the mix is of people. What races are, I don't know if anybody else plays that game, but I do. Right? So I'm like, what? Because the interesting thing is the next question, why is that important? Or what importance does that have? And then I have to check myself about how am I playing into this race consciousness, right? So that's my little joke with Prince, right? He just got back with Warner Brothers. I'm so excited because now so I'm from Minneapolis. So Prince is there's a big purple rain with an E and an I, right? So and so he just got back with Warner Brothers, and I'm really excited about that because he can mass produce his stuff and stop depending on cult followers like me to support his mansion. He can spread it out, right? So there's that. So following up kind of on what this being Good Friday, so to speak, or the journey of Christ to the cross. I think it's very interesting that I have this particular piece that I want to play for you, which comes from a speech delivered by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And I have a question. Is King County named after MLK?
It is now.
Oh. It wasn't originally, but it is now. Because I saw some stuff, I was like, no, it can't be. Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, however it happened, interesting. So I'd like for you to listen to the themes that are played in this presentation. And how many people have seen me present before? Okay. So you guys this may be familiar to you, and it's on YouTube, so it's not magic or anything like that. That's where I grab lots of stuff from YouTube, so you can get it too. Right. So, but I want you to listen to some of the themes that come out in this presentation, and how does that apply? How can that apply to us? So we'll do that. And also, there's a computer animated software used in this called AutoTune. Don't let that distract you. You can get it in just a second. So it sounds computerized a bit, and there will be subtitles there for you to read. All right. So we'll go ahead and start this. Oh, go back.
Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on in these powerful days. These days of challenge make America what it ought to be. We got some difficult days ahead, but it's enough because I think about the clock. I look over, I see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that millions of people will get to the promised land. Christians all over the South started sitting in lunch hours. I knew that if they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American creed. Taking the whole nation back to those great values of democracy, which were guaranteed by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We got some difficulties in here, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over, I've seen the promised land. But I want you to know tonight, I've seen the people who are get to the promised land. I'm not worried about anything. I know I have seen the glory of the Lord. 1962, when Negroes in Albany, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere because of me. Headline, you better listen again. 1964, black people in Birmingham, Alabama, roused the conscience of this nation, brought in the beat of the civil rights movement. Later that year, August, tried to tell America about the dream that I had. We got some difficulties in here, but it doesn't matter to me because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight, I've seen the people who get to the promised land. We got some difficulties in here, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight, I've seen the people who get to the promised land. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anything. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So who was the speaker? Who? Dr. King. Okay, cool. What were some of the themes that came out of that presentation that stuck out for you? What were some of the themes that kept replaying? Hope, fearlessness, determination, faith, vision, community. Does anyone know, are people familiar with what speech this comes out of? Yeah, I had to see a couple of people nodding their heads. For those of us who may not necessarily be as familiar, I want you to think of all the speeches that you know by Dr. King. And first of all, do you think he gave more than one speech? Right? Yeah, he gave more than one speech. And what I would suggest that if we can only come up with one title, we have lots of work to do. So this came out of which speech? Which speech was this out of? It was the mountaintop speech, right? It's in the hook. It was a soft pitch. Yeah, so it's the mountaintop speech. And the thing that I find very profound about the mountaintop speech is a couple of things. One is that this is Dr. King's last speech before his assassination on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And he does something very interesting even prior to giving the speech. So he had a tradition of sending Coretta Scott King, his wife, flowers while he was away. So he'd send her flowers, and she being a Southern belle would get accustomed to these flowers, and in a certain kind of way they were delivered. So she had some standards and expectations. And so in this particular situation, or this particular activity, Dr. King sent Coretta Scott King some plastic flowers. Now, being the Southern belle that she was and having high standards, she was appalled at this, right? So she calls Martin. She says, "Martin, what's going on with these plastic flowers?" And he says, "Baby, I don't feel good about this one. There's just something about it that I don't. Something's not right with this one." And being a good wife, and he's unsure of himself, and it's sounding somewhat depressed. And as a good wife, what does she do for her husband? She reassures him. She encourages him. No, this is just like all the other ones. You'll be fine. You'll knock it out the park. You're good at what you do, Mark. You go do it, right? So she's pumping him up, and so she gets to the reason she called. She said, "Well, what's with these plastic flowers?" He said, "Honey, I wanted you to have something to remember me by." Wow. Dr. King wasn't supposed to be in Memphis. It wasn't a part of the plan. But why did he go to Memphis in the first place? Yeah, so to help with the sanitation workers strike, who were not only African American, but also poor whites. And some people say this is the reason that his assassination was necessary, because he moved, because one of the things that we understood with the Birmingham bus boycotts was what? Money talks. When they shut down the whole city of Birmingham's transportation system, you don't think that had ripples effects in every economic sector in that city. So King starts to understand, wait a minute, not only do we need these civil and human rights, we also can have some economic rights. And so some people suspect this is why his assassination became necessary. And so he gives this speech. The second reason I think the speech is extremely profound is because he says some very interesting stuff in it. He says, I might not make it to the promised land, but we will. Why is he using promised land? Why is he using mountaintop? Because it's biblical. And why would a reverend use biblical? So oftentimes when we talk about Dr. King, we forget the fact that he was a Baptist preacher. And that becomes important because he recognized not only was this a physical battle, but this was a spiritual one as well. Which is why Gandhi becomes important, as his battle also was a spiritual battle. So we're not just looking for the physical creature comforts, but we're looking at ways to how do we knit our human souls together in this thing, the system of brotherhood and sisterhood, right? So that became very profound. And the third reason I find this profound, just a profound oratory presentation, is because he also said, I won't make it, just like he was tying it to the biblical story that he was referencing, right? And the leader of that biblical movement also did not make it to the promised land. And so when he's referring to what is more commonly known as the Exodus, and TBS does an excellent presentation with Charlton Heston. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but Charlton Heston's The Ten Commandments, right? And Charlton Heston is standing there with the rod. Let my people go. And out of my cold dead hand. No, that's his LRA speech. I get those things. And so I think if TBS could come up with a part 2 of their 10 Commandments, it would feature Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua and Caleb were the new leaders that followed Moses, but they had a problem because Moses' people were spoiled. They were spoiled. They said when Moses was here, this is what would happen. And this is what happens in my imagination, right? That when Moses was here, these things would happen. And so Joshua and Caleb have a drop the mic moment with Moses' people. So they gather all the people together. They stand in front of those people, and they give this pronouncement. Moses is dead. And walk off stage. Why was that necessary? Why was that necessary? It's a reality check. It's time to move on. I want to say this with all earnestness and seriousness, that Dr. King is dead. Gandhi, dead. Crazy Horse, dead. Mother Teresa, dead. Harriet Tubman, dead. Nelson Mandela, dead. Will their work continue? How? It already is. How?
Everyday situations and occurrences.
Uh-huh. If their work is going to continue, it is going to be at your hands. You are someone's Mother Teresa. You are someone's Gandhi. You are someone's Dr. King. Other people's liberty is locked behind your embarrassment. Have you ever been in a situation where you've heard or you've seen something and you go, that is not right? At least you say it to yourself. That situation was horrible. Should have never went down like that. Somebody should say something. Has that somebody ever been you? And I want you to think about the times when it hasn't been you. And so you are someone's liberator, but it's hidden behind your embarrassment. And what are we embarrassed about? We're embarrassed about the fact that we don't know, that we feel inadequate for dealing with situations. And I want to tell you that you are inadequate. So you should be rest assured that you're fine. Right? But one of the things that happens is that we succumb to one of the things that I refer to as a form of tricknology. Tricknology. Tricknology is convincing people that this is not true. That there's some kind of special character added to folks that create something other than what this DNA presents. So if I'm a female and I'm rich, then somehow I'm a different kind of human. If I live in a certain kind of neighborhood, then maybe I'm a different kind of human. But when it comes down to that DNA produces humanity. So there is no hiding place down here. Now, I found it very interesting as I was doing research for this particular presentation that I want to tell you what my original title of this workshop was, which was Black People Are Racist Too. But I didn't think people could handle that quite yet. Right? Black people are racist too. At any rate, so we go to this idea of there's no hiding place down here. Does anyone know where that comes from? Anyone? So it is it's often referred to as sometimes a Negro spiritual or some of those old spirituals. There is no hiding place down here. There's no hiding place down here. I went to the rock to hide my face. The rock cried out, no hiding place. There's no hiding place down here. Now, as I was doing my research, I went to I came across an Amish choir who sang that, and the Amish referred to everyone else as the English. So whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're white, you're all referred to as the English. And they have an interesting version of this that says that there's no hiding place down there. Interesting, right? But in my African American experience, we've always said down here. So I thought that was very interesting. But it was just a little caveat on the side that very white people would say down there and very colored people would say down here. Thought that was interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of racism because we need to switch our paradigm. We need to change our paradigm. First of all, racism is pervasive. It touches every area of American life. Every area of American life. Every interaction I have has some racial tone attached to it. That racism currently acts and works best as an invisible entity. If we don't talk about it, it thrives. When we start shedding light on it, either at our, we'll talk about that in just a second. That racial conciliation will not end racism. How many people have been in communities where they talk about racial reconciliation? Has anyone been in it? Okay, cool. Doesn't work, and I'll tell you why. And then lastly, that we have to recognize that that racism is an economic system. We've been sold, and in the past, it's been very much about the social conditioning of individuals, but we have to recognize that it is an economic system. so that we can dismantle that economic system. All right? So I'm not going to go over everything in the presentation, but it is, you have it available, it's online, and you also have the link to the presentation. But I want to establish some things. We'll skip that. We'll skip that. Skip that. So in 1970, October 30th, I was born to my parents, and my mother gave birth to me. She handed me to the doctor. The doctor did something very weird in the 70s. They turned me upside down and they slapped me. And so being a self-respecting young man, I did what I knew, which was to slap the doctor back. That's actually an old Richard Pryor joke and the only one I can tell. So in your handout on page 8 are these descriptions. Now, this is very interesting to me because I was the affirmative action officer for Anoka County. Oh, and if you need handouts, I have plenty. There should be some at the end of the rows. So I was the affirmative action officer for Anoka County, which is the fourth largest county in Minnesota. And my job was to do all of our reports. And so when we talk about this idea of race, this is what we started looking at. And so the federal government has its definitions of race. The federal government defines race. And so when we talk about Hispanic or Latino, is a person of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture of origin, regardless of race. Whew, that's a lot, right? Why regardless of race? Because they're talking about color. It doesn't say color up there. This is the federal government. So why do we not say color? Latinos come in all colors. Why? Because we're confused. The Spanish were busy. Right? Yes, ma'am. That's all border-based definitions, right? So all of this stuff in terms of Hispanic or Latino, the Spanish were all over the place, right? So they created, and it's so funny. Well, we'll get to that in just a second, too. So American Indian or Alaskan Native, a person having any original peoples of North and South America, including Central America, who maintain, now this is interesting, because it gives some qualifications, right? Who maintain cultural identification through. So first qualification is to what? Maintain, keep, hold, right? Then they say the two methods by which you keep, maintain, or hold. So the first is through what? Tribal affiliation. And what's the second? Community attachment. Through tribal affiliation or community attachment. Explain boarding schools. What were boarding schools designed to do for American Indians and Alaskan Natives? Destroy the community attachment and the tribal affiliation. Race is all in the mix. Trying to save the man but kill the Indian. Asian, a person having any original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or Indian subcontinent, including, for example, Cambodia, China, India, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Pakistan, Philippine Islands, Thailand, Vietnam. Do you know any people who from any of those groups? Do they look alike? Do their people groups look alike? No. Right? They don't look alike. Black or African American, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. Anyone ever seen a Somal? It's an island, not Madagascar. It's not Samoa. Solomon Islands. Anyone seen black people from Solomon Islands? Right? There is a group of black people from Solomon Islands that have blonde hair and blue eyes and black skin. Gorgeous. As a matter of fact, one of them was on what's the Tyra Banks' show for models? America's Next Top Model, right? I have guilty pleasures. That and Dancing with the Stars. I'm sorry. So I think that's interesting because black people come from more places than just Africa. Dwayne Johnson, for crying out loud, right? So here we go. Native, Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Hawaii, Guam, Samoa, or other Pacific Islands. And then lastly, white, which is, I think, interesting. White is a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. White. North Africa? Where would that be? Morocco, Tunisia. Have you seen Tunisian people? Right? Doesn't make sense. None of this stuff makes sense. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is the federal government of the United States. Anyone here from Canada? Do they have the same designations in Canada? They don't. Do they have the same distinctions in Europe? They don't. Do they have the same distinctions in South Africa? They don't. A Ford F-150 in Guatemala, South Africa, New Zealand, China, the Ukraine, Sweden is still what? A Ford F-150. Why? Because it has the same makeup. Because it is real. It is a tactile thing. How come race doesn't apply the same way in all of these other places? Because it is made up. It is made up. You are what you eat. So junk food, healthy food, organic food, empty calories, cholesterol, good, bad, high fructose corn syrup, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of these are in relationship to what you eat physically. But what happens when you eat these kinds of things mentally? You don't have a healthy lifestyle when you eat these things mentally. So you are what you eat. Racism is so pervasive. And I don't have time to tell the whole story, but you have three people in a lake. No matter what they look like, when they leave the lake, how do they leave? Wet. They leave wet. Racism is so pervasive that all of us who encounter this particular American system, by definition, are racist. All of us. The goal of racism is to destroy the human soul. I believe that there are two parts of the human soul. There's the spirit and there's the physical body. And when I can separate those two things, I create a void which allows a little monster who is waiting for that void to happen to occur. And that little void we will call free market capitalism. Have you ever seen a commercial that actually made you feel good about being human? They're usually telling you how you are you're insufficient for your humanity. So buy this product, drink this stuff. But we've had avatars that have taught us that that doesn't work. One that hurt me the most was Robin Williams. He had everything, and he had a hole in his soul. And so how do we heal that hole in the soul? We have to reunite this idea that the body and the soul are relational. And I think meditation, I think caring for other people, giving examples of how that body and soul should be united is important. Mediation, conflict resolution is extremely important. Right now I'm pushing for the State Human Rights Commission to get into a mediation process, because what they're doing is people are filing complaints, they're finding no findings, but people are still hurt. And then they rise up in the streets, and people are like, well, why are they mad? They're mad because the systems have not healed their heart, healed their arm, or healed their hurt. I just wanted to point out just a little bit that during the slave trade, 48% of slaves left West Africa and went to the Caribbean 41% went to Brazil, and only 5% went to the United States. And that sounds like a good thing. But one of the things that we have to recognize is that the United States had a new technology for slavery. And that new technology was called treating your slaves better. Why should we have to import so many slaves when we can grow them? And so we took that 5% and we grew that 5% where the Caribbean and Brazil burned through their slaves. The average age of a slave in the early part of the 1700s was 23 years old. They were burning through slaves as fast as they could import them. The other thing to recognize is that I put the size of the United States, and this is the actual size of Africa, because I wanted to also say this, because some people don't like to believe this. But the Europeans were not as powerful or as dynamic as people want to present them. So they needed help from the continent to continue this idea of transatlantic slave trade. So the Europeans did not do it all themselves. They had people on the continent that were helpful in that particular economic process. If they could have found other groups that would be as profitable as the ones they found in West Africa, they would have certainly had those folks in that particular system. But this was a popular or profitable existence. We'll skip that. This idea that race is so pervasive, it's so pervasive that even black people can succumb to this idea that is espoused by race, right? So here is an old German picture about the man and the brute, and here is LeBron James with a model, very much modeling the same kind of thing, right? So racism is extremely pervasive. I'll show this one. Oh, we'll come back. So again, I didn't put this together. This is something I found on YouTube, so I think it can be somewhat offensive, but we'll just play part of it. Sucking up my time, YouTube. Oh, never mind. So when we talk about this idea, I won't play it. You can watch it when you download the video or you see it online. But the misappropriation of culture. And so one of the things that gets sold or exported outside of the United States is this idea of what race is, and particularly who black people are. And so this is a sitcom, and I don't know if it was real or if it was a satire of a sitcom, but throughout the sitcom, these Asian individuals are referring to each other as the N-word, and they're like, "What's up, my N-word?" And you know what I'm talking about, right? So okay, so there's that. So there's this idea of this Black American stereotype, and so there's this idea of the free-range chicken. Has anyone ever bought free-range eggs? Right? Anybody ever bought free-range chicken? Right? Is it the same price as traditionally raised chicken? No, it's more expensive. And why? What is the rationale for that difference in price? It costs more. What are the costs associated with it? Yes. So you're paying for the humane treatment of chickens, which is interesting. Humane treatment of chicken. Okay, anyway, right? Who should we be treating humanely? Oh, anyway. So free-range chickens are more expensive than traditional poultry. And one might even suggest that the free-range chickens have a better life. They live in better, cleaner neighborhoods. Right? And one might say that these urban chickens are full of disease and drugs and crime because chickens cannibalize themselves, right? So you have to either clip their nose or put on chicken glasses so that they don't cannibalize themselves, particularly when they're in close quarters. But what we don't necessarily realize is that whether you're a free-range chicken or you're a caged chicken, what is your destiny? dinner. When we talk about this idea of race, we've been sold that because I'm not that race or I'm not that race, or I have these privileges and I don't have those privileges. If we're not careful, if we get caught too much up into that way of thinking, we don't see people as our brothers and sisters, that what happens to you actually does impact me. Then we get caught up in this and we don't recognize that we're on the animal farm. And that the system simply wants to eat us for dinner, whether we feel like we have privileges or not. I find it interesting that we're the land of the free and the home of the brave, but I have to spend so much time filling out forms for anything I want to do. Doesn't sound like freedom to me. Other people come to our country and they're like, wow, you got to do all of this stuff just to get through that? I have a car that goes 120 miles an hour. I will never drive 121 miles an hour. The great President Ronald Reagan said that if aliens were to come to our planet, we will recognize how much more we have alike than we are different. I hope that aliens coming to our planet don't push us there. Lastly, there is no inherent conflict. And we have to talk about this idea of liberation from this racial construct that we've been inundated with. So if we look at this diagram, we see we've had people on the top and people on the bottom. And then we said, that's not right. That's not justice. We need to take the people on the bottom and put them on the top and put the people on the bottom. Right? Then we said, you know what? Let's get everybody on the table. Let's get everybody on the table. And then we said, no, we can't fit everybody on the table, so let's have separate but equal. You take that side of the table, and I take this side of the table. And then we said, you know what? Let's get everybody on the same side of the table. What has always been the problem? True liberation doesn't come until we start dealing with how do we get rid of the table. And so there is a difference between freedom and liberty. What is freedom? What is freedom? Freedom is a condition of membership. I have a guest pass to a gym. I can go and do all the stuff, but because it's just a guest membership, if I want to go the next day, I what? I have to join. And then I have freedom. Liberty says that whatever I can do in the gym, I can do around these lakes. I can do in these parks. I can do whatever I want. And so all too often we get those two things confused. This is last slide, and my time is done. That those of us who want to be racially conscious, and not only it doesn't happen at once, we also have to be mindful in deconstructing that stuff, right? My daughter is 2 years old, and she sees another kid, and guess what her natural inclination is? To go play. And the Hotel Deca, where I'm riding with someone that I don't know, our inclination isn't to speak. It's to ignore. That's not natural. When we talk about this idea of race, and we have to deconstruct it because it is a part of an economic system, and it took a while to get there, and it's going to take a while to undo it, but it has to be purposeful until it becomes a part of who we are. My name is Andre Cohen. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're done at 11, is that correct? Oh, 15. I got 10 more minutes. Good. Okay. Whew. All right. Good. And I was looking at conservative and I was like, all right, cool. So I got 10 more minutes. Good. All right. So I can get through this then. I'm excited. So this is from a movie called Spinning Into Butter, and it talks about the slow progress that she had to becoming a racist, and she didn't even know it. So you can watch that at your convenience. Because race is an obstacle illusion. It becomes one of those things that creates this artificial barrier between authentic human relations. Obstacle illusions, artificial barriers to authentic human relations. Other obstacle illusions are this idea of gender, disabilities, socioeconomic status. These are all things that were created by us to define our social construct. All right?
Consistently, there are misnomers, misrepresentations, and false perceptions about black men that whatever your social economic status is, we believe.
Are there more black men in jail or in college?
That's a good question.
Jail.
More black men in jail.
Have to say in jail.
More in jail.
What becomes problematic when you, has anyone had to answer a question like this or heard this question posed before, asked before? Right? And what becomes problematic when people have this response?
Conditioning ourselves.
We're conditioning ourselves. What else? What's that? That's what they believe. That's what else believes. So not only black men believe it, who else believes it? The people who put them in jail, who else? We do. We do. We succumb to that stuff, right? So I think it's interesting that question is posed. And on page 10, we answer that question. On page 10, we answer that question. Now, it's interesting that the question is problematic. The question is dumb. It's a dumb question. Anyone played that game, Apples to Apples? So why do they call it Apples to Apples? Because the apples and oranges metaphor. So to have a good comparison, you need to compare what to what? Same. Apples to apples. So you're saying that word is the same as this other word, right? So apples to apples. This question does not pose an apples to apples scenario for us. It says prison and college. What is the age range of a college student? 18 to 22? Let's give them 24, right? 18 to 24. What is the age range of someone who can go to prison or jail? In some municipalities, it's as young as 13 to whatever. So this comparison is a trick. It's a trick. And so on page 10, we have the answer. And so this becomes problematic because it becomes a part of these urban legends in Minnesota. And I can't speak to what happens in Washington or the Northwest region, but I think that it's interesting that anytime they show pictures of welfare recipients, they are people of color, specifically black, single mothers. The majority of the people on welfare in Minnesota are white. Why? Because they're employing tricknology. Tricknology. Racism is an economic system designed to exploit people to fill that void. It's an economic system. Oh. Let's skip that. Skip that. We'll go here. So it's an economic system. And one of the things that, so I talked a little bit about cultural competence training. And one of the failings that I've had with my encounters with cultural competence training is they don't talk about the context. Right? So context creates the opportunity for people to have culture. Now, I don't know about this part of the United States, but back in Minneapolis and in the 7-county metro, there's if you want to talk about a community of color, there is a code word that we use to talk about a community of color. And I think I'll write it up and see if this applies to you. And this is the code word that we use for communities of color. Dash side. South dash side. It's code. Right? Anybody else find that? The north dash side. Anybody ever in your communities, does that become the code? Yeah. Okay, so it's dash in, huh? Right, so south end, north end, blah, 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 blah. I think that's interesting, right? So what we don't talk about is the context. So what is context? Context is very simply the time, the place, and the geography by which people live. And culture becomes their adaptation to the context. So if I want to understand why people are behaving this way, what do I also have to look at? Where, when, and the conditions. Right? So it was very interesting that Thomas Jefferson introduced this concept of race by saying, scientists will have to tell us if Native Americans are indeed fully human or are of some other different race. So who was Jefferson calling on? He was calling on scientists to do what? To find the differences between Native Americans and the rest of the human race. Kennedy, who did Kennedy call on when he said, we're going to place a man on the moon? Who did he call on to make that happen? Science. He called on science to make those things happen. And so when Jefferson does this, they have a particular question that they're trying to answer, and guess what they find? What do scientists come up with? That is not what scientists came up with. Because how do we explain all the evil things that we did toward Native Americans or American Indians? We can only do that because they were not. They found everything that they were looking for because that was the question they were asking. It was the question they were begged to be answered by the U.S. government. Why slaves? Because we didn't see them as totally human. 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Can somebody pull it up? Do you have one of those smartphones? Anybody got one of those smartphones, phones that are smart, that hook up to Google or Apple? Anybody got one of those? Nobody's got one of those phones? You can just look up the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Can you just look it up? Just look up the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Just look it up. It's easy to look up. You just go to Wikipedia. You can go to Wikipedia. You don't have to go to LexisNexis. You can just go to Wikipedia or Google. Just look it up. 13th Amendment. Just interesting to me, 13th Amendment. Because 1863, what did we do in 1863? We had the... You put in 13?
Came up with 13.
Oh, so there we go. So first of all, what happened in 1863? Civil War was ending. So what helped commemorate the ending of the Civil War in 1863? Maybe I shouldn't have skipped that slide. The Emancipation Proclamation, right? And so later, we come to a point where Later, we come to a point, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation, we come to a point where we need to ratify folks' participation. But there is a Trojan horse stacked inside of the 13th Amendment. So can somebody read for me the first sentence of the 13th Amendment? Got it?
Neither slavery or involuntary servitude.
Oh, stop right there. So first of all, we said in the 13th Amendment, in the Constitution, we do not want slaves anymore. It should have been a period. What comes next, please?
Except as punishment.
Accept. Well, what does accept mean? There's what? There's still an allowance. It still can happen. As a matter of fact, it's our will for it to keep happening, because when you say when your parents have said to you, or you've said to people that you're responsible for, don't do that. You mean that, right? Do you ever say, don't do that except when this happens or that happens? Well, I'll let you comment on it. So continue, please.
Except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
So now we have what we have now, the school to prison pipeline. The new Jim Crow was tucked as a secret weapon in the Constitution of the United States, where race becomes the currency for dictating these things. So can somebody look up something? I will need two people to look up two things, and then I'll end on this point. Two things I want you to look up. One is something called the white codes. Look up the white codes. Then I want you to look up something called the black codes. So who will look up the white codes? Raise your hand if you'll look that up for me. All right, cool. We got the white codes over here. Is someone who will look up the black codes? All right, so you'll look up the black codes. All right. So what do you see as the white codes? What comes up? Medical dictionary? Anything legal about the white codes? No. Right? Okay, cool. Black codes.
In the United States, the black codes were laws passed by southern states in 1865 and 1866 after the Civil War.
Okay, you can stop right there. That's enough. Right? 13th Amendment. It became illegal to be black. Why? Because we've been sucked into this racial consciousness. And so what I'd like for you to do is, and with your loved ones and with your friends, I want you to become an advocate for me. On the back part of your handout on page 12 are some things that I want you to do to help deconstruct or tell the story about this stuff called race that's made up. Ellis Island did a number, and what was the immigrant island on this end of the world? So it was Ellis Island in New York. What was it where immigrants came and they were processed? She said Alcatraz. Yeah. Your family came like my family did, right? All right. So, I want you to look at those things because it's extremely important to recognize the dignity and honor of being human, that there are some systemic things that have blocked people from having full expression of their humanity, and race is one of those things. Race is important, but it's not as important as those values that you wrote down. And I want you to figure out, as you become an advocate for folks, as you're looking for mediation with folks, what are those things that we have in common? And why do they act different? What cultural context are they coming from that may appear or present itself as acting or behaving differently? My name is Andre Cohen. Thank you so much for your time. This is my second interview. That is great. All right. So the next session starts when? 11:30? Okay. Any questions, comments, observations? All right, great. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.